Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October podcast, the long-term care or the long-term. This is Angie with Producers XL, and I'm really excited to have with me this month Tim Vinoy with One America. And I think we have something really, really interesting to bring to you because we're going to talk about a sales process when it comes to long-term care. And this is pretty impressive to me. So Tim, welcome. I'm always happy to have you here for the podcast.
Appreciate that. Yeah, excited to be a part of your group today. So thank you.
Yeah. So Tim, One America has built in this sales presentation, sales process, sales track, whatever we want to call it, into their illustration software. What I think is absolutely fascinating, and I know the folks on the podcast can't see this, so I would highly encourage you, before we get started, I want to give you my email and my phone number, because this podcast is definitely going to have an action item for you. So my phone number is 1-800-541-6705. My email is Angie@producersxl.com. After we explain this, if you have any questions, if you want to see this, if you want this in your hands, I would highly encourage you to get a hold of me so you can have this, because we're never going to move the needle on long-term care sales if we don't learn how to bring up the conversation with our clients, right? We have got to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And we all know why. A reactive sale is that person that basically has either experienced a doctor's appointment, they know they're going to need care at some point in their life. It's usually a health event that triggers that. That's not going to move the needle. That's actually going to cause a poor experience for not only you as the agent, but for the consumer, right? For your client, because now we've got rated cases, we've got declined cases. We just don't have, it just wasn't a feel-good situation for them. So what I think is important, and Tim, we kind of talked about this, if anybody's ever heard Harley Gordon, elder law attorney, talk about the people you should be talking to about extended care planning are not the people that are asking you for it. It's the 50-year-old that doesn't want to have a conversation with you. And really what he means by that is explaining the consequences of not having a plan. So, Tim, we're going to remove the entire idea that we're going to run quotes. Can I have an illustration? Because what we're going to do is flop down an illustration in front of somebody and wonder why they don't buy it, right? Ledgers don't sell insurance. So this sales presentation, I am super excited about, because wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. Isn't that how most sales folks are successful?
Yeah, I think, Angie, you bring up a lot of good points there. And I think the reason we've kind of looked at this from a One America perspective is that the industry, the long-term care industry, we get, and maybe, I guess a broader point, the life insurance industry, the advent of computers, the advent of, hey, let's run an illustration and run back out and put that across the table. And supposedly that illustration will sell itself. And I think that the art of the sale, a good sales script, a sales process, we need to go back to that, kind of back to the basics. And so I think in that process, the more we get comfortable with that, and we looked at this, we looked at our illustration. I mean, that's it, ledgers, numbers, kind of that eye chart, and people don't know what they don't know. Consumers don't know what they should be looking for. And so we try to equip the idea here is a sales script that to your point can be duplicatable. It's a process that we could walk a client through or a family through to uncover the need. I mean, we're going to start, as you talked, and you'll probably mention this, but the first number of pages is really open-ended. It's really understanding the impact financially, emotionally, physically, but we want to talk about the impact of the family, and we call it their extended care plan. So yeah, we really want to provide some scripting and some images, some graphics that kind of bring that out. And because that picture's worth 1,000 words. And if we can equip the advisor of being kind of the, I call it consistently boring, using the same script over and over again. I find that, but there's confidence in that. And that becomes where we can make an impact, where advisors can have a more meaningful conversation with their client to understand the why. And so I think that's key to our what we thought and what we've heard from the field. We've only had it out for a couple months, but we're excited. And I think you're going to bring this up, but the first couple of pages can be used as a I call it a technique book, right?
Yeah.
You don't. It's generic in nature. It's not product or client specific.
That's what I love about it, because and I love the fact that every carrier that I work with in this space, right, whether they're traditional, they're hybrid, they're linked, whatever the case is, none of you are out there screaming that your carrier's the one and only, right? So the idea is not one solution works for everybody. So the great news is like you said, the first 4 pages of this sales process is literally just helping you develop the need and really kind of opening the eyes of your consumers. So instead of thinking this as a sales appointment, it's really more of a planning appointment, because consumers need to understand, how do they build a plan? How do they build a plan that works for their family when they need care? When a loved one needs care, how do we plan for that? And that's really what this does. So I'm going to kind of, well, first, Tim, you had talked about a survey that was put out by NAFA, which I find absolutely fascinating. I would love for you to go through that, because it plays right into exactly what basically page 1 of this sales process talks about.
Yeah, so we're doing a presentation at the end of the month for NAFA, and so One America put together. We did a client-facing, customer-facing survey a year ago, last fall, and when we asked customers about what they thought the primary purpose of a long-term care policy was, 52% of those individuals responded. They said, it removes the burden from my family, right? The burden to my family. And so the policy would help, so the family doesn't have to provide the care, they can supervise the care. So that was the number 1 reason. The number 2 reason was, and not far behind, was 46% said they didn't want to impoverish their spouse. So there was a financial aspect to the reasons for the need for care. And then the number 3 reason, 37%, they wanted to receive adequate care. So they were concerned with, if I bought a policy, this would provide me income, or the policy would pay for, so I could get adequate care at a facility or in my home or what have you. So that's the why people buy. And so if you're thinking about a client, know that they don't want to be a burden to their family. They don't want to spend down assets if they don't have to, or income to pay for my care. So my wife's impoverished, or my spouse, and I want to make sure I get the care the choice of care, maybe the location. But further in the study, as we went through this, we said, who would pay for, or how would you pay for the care? And yet 64% of them came back and said personal savings. 53% said Medicare. And we know that Medicare is limited at best. That's not a plan. That's health insurance. 17% said Medicaid.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, that's, nobody, I don't think most people, if they understood what you get from Medicaid, but that is a safeguard. And then 12% were not sure. So I look at the disconnect between what they want the insurance policy to do, and then how would they pay for it? Well, the number 2 reason they would buy an insurance policy is they don't want to impoverish the spouse, but yet when they said, how are you going to pay for it? I'm going to take money off the table. And so the good news from an advisor perspective, for Angie, those that are on the listening through this podcast, the ability to help educate your customer on what the policy actually does and what it will help. Not going to be a burden to the kids, not going to, we're not going to, we're going to keep lifestyle. We're going to be able to keep some of that income for surviving spouse. We're going to give you some money so that you can get care at your choice. But so that was.
Don't you find though, really, I mean, so this is why wash, rinse, repeat is so important on this, right? Because you really truly get basically the same objections almost all the time when it comes to a long-term care sale. It's really kind of always in one of these certain categories, right? So if you think about the disconnect with why would I purchase this and how am I going to get the money to pay for it? There is a true disconnect. So, right, we come at this from an educational perspective just to simply lay out exactly how everything works. It's a plan. I mean, people don't just wake up someday and go, hey, look at that, I'm going to retire. No, they work with an advisor. They have a financial planner. You plan retirement parties, you plan birthdays, you plan your funerals. It's a plan.
Yeah, I think that the planning aspect of that and helping them walk through that extended care plan conversation, because it goes hand in glove with your planning. If you're doing planning for clients, whether that's, to your point, you mentioned a whole bunch of those, or estate planning, the legacy, business equalization. I mean, all the different planning tools and techniques that we have in the marketplace, that the extended care plan should be equally important to what that looks like. So that becomes a key part, but it also becomes going back, I think you mentioned the audience in their 50s, right? So if you think about, if I was to go back and start prospecting today, I would think of all my friends and family members that are in their 50s that have possibly a front row seat to what's going on with their mom and dad, right? That becomes your audience. And not to say that a 35-year-old isn't interested in long-term care, but they have other needs, right? But I think once somebody's in their 50s, they start to think about, because of their personal experience. And
it is.
So I think that's the key here too, is that if I can open up these conversations. And I went back and just looked at the first four slides, the 5 slides in what I call the presentation book. Outside of the first page that has the One America logo, there is no mention about One America nor a product.
Right.
It's all about the customer. So I'm biased because I work for One America, but I also realize that you got a lot of great tools when a lot of different companies. And so if we can help you with that conversation and you do that consistently, you're going to find that there's 5 or 6 different objections or questions they get, and you figure out how to answer those and move on. And if you consistently do it over time, you'll be an expert. You get really good at that, and you'll find out how easy it is when you start to practice.
Well, and Tiff, didn't you even mention to me, I don't know if this came out of that same survey, but the number one reason, 52% of why people would want to even consider this type of insurance is because they don't want to be a burden to the family, but yet 45% of them said their spouse is going to provide that care. And 34% said their kids will provide that care. Well, that's not exactly not being a burden.
Yeah. So once again, it goes back to this disconnect a little bit.
Yes.
What we think in one mind, and yet where I'm going to get it in the other side. And I think from the advisor perspective is to kind of walk them through the conversation, getting them thinking about who would provide the care? What's the impact of that? Would it be shared equally? Those are questions we ask in this, because most people haven't thought about that, or if they have, you're providing great counsel to them as far as the extended care process. And then the last part of that is the income reallocation, right? It's an income conversation. And what does that do for the surviving spouse or the healthy spouse, from an income? So those are your two pieces. I mean, if you can master the first 4 or 5 pages of this illustration, or the sales story, I call it the sales script, it's agnostic to product. It's never gonna It's not going to, maybe it's a traditional health-based policy. Maybe it's a life with an acceleration. Maybe it's, maybe they can't get in, maybe it's an annuity product. So there's lots of ways to equip the advisor to have good conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, what Tim and I just spent time doing was going through basically page 1 of this sales script, sales story, sales process. I mean, how powerful is that? If you had something that kind of kept you on track and you're talking to your consumer, just bringing the awareness of, hey, what if you needed care? Who's going to provide that? Let's think about that. And then you just led into this. Page 2 of this, of the sales process is, what's your family's plan to deal with that? I mean, what are the financial impacts, and where's that going to come from? Is it retirement income? What does that look like? How long could you possibly need care? And then it talks about, we're living much longer than we used to, right? That's the good and the bad of it. And I know this one's going to strike a chord with some of us long-term care nerds out there, right? But it says up to 70% have a chance of, once they reach age 65, of needing long-term care services. I don't care if you use the 70% or if you go to the HHS survey that says 52%. 52% is still a pretty high odd of needing care. And then, let's not forget the cognitive issues, because those are the ones that become quite devastating to the family, because those aren't the ones that are typically very short duration claims. And that does become an incredible financial impact to a family.
Well, and Angie, I think as you kind of go through the pages as you were talking about in the sales script, you get to that 4th page there, and I always talk about, if you needed care, how would you pay for it, right? That becomes we've set the stage for the first couple pages to talk about the impact to the family, the impact to my retirement income. What happens to retirement income over years that if I needed more care. But then we start thinking about, and I came up with this idea. It was called the 5 buckets. I used it with a client years ago, but we were able to get it approved through compliance. So I mean, the good news is everything we're talking about is client facing materials that you can take out and give to a client. You can walk them through. I mean, if I was once again back in practice, I'd probably laminate these pages.
For sure.
And this would be my presentation. So I know it's kind of old school, but that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with walking a client through and the conversation, but it gets into, if you had to pay for care, would you take it from an IRA? And have you considered the tax impact of that, or maybe a non-qualified asset? You had capital gains if I had to sell it, and we bring in the need for, we introduce insurance, and insurance is a discounted dollar. So I think that those really became, it kind of gets them thinking about what asset would I sell first, second, or third, and is it something that I should be thinking about? How would I put together an insurance plan if I was to look at it? And I think that's that once again, a visual that kind of walks them through. They can see the numbers that we've illustrated, and it gets them thinking, how would they pay for it? And I think that becomes whether they're worth $20 million or $2 million. It doesn't matter. Even 800,000. How would you pay for it? And let's give you some options. And if you'd like to know more about we can get into customizing a plan. That'd be the story that I would tell them, is we can put together some numbers for you. I just need to know a little bit more about kind of where we're at from how would you pay for it, and find the dollars, right? That's kind of, but it's there. It's there in the technique book. So
I love this because it gives you a track to run on. You like you said, if you can master the first few pages of this sales process, this sales story that's in front of you, wonderful pages that you can laminate and just kind of go through, because what you're really doing is you're laying the groundwork, you're kind of causing that disturbance, you're going to talk to them about the various solutions, and then ultimately you're going to go back, because at the very end of it, right, Tim, you got to ask. You got to ask for the business. You got to have a call to action. And I love that yours does that at the very end as well. How are we going to pay for this? Well, what is our call to action? What's our next step?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's when we look at the full illustration or the full sales presentation from start to finish, it's about 14 pages long. But the first, as you mentioned, the first 5 pages is about the story itself. The 6 through 11 is more customized with respect to the customer. And we kind of overlay that live, die, quit story. What that looks like from a need perspective, and need for why lifetime, why do I want to pay an annual pay? What's the options there? So it kind of gives you some high level details what the benefits are going to provide for. And then we talk about our claims concierge team as far as if claims, we sometimes forget about that, but that's a huge selling point from a One America perspective is our claims concierge. And then the last piece is the call to action is let's take the next step. We're you know, let's not wait. Let's go ahead and get this lock in your health today. It's you know, lock in. It's less expensive today than waiting. So we kind of open up some of those pieces, but I can't tell you how many times I've sat through a sales presentation where when we get to the end and the advisor never asked, they're waiting for the advisor's waiting for, oh, I can't wait to buy. You know, where do I sign up for this? And I think the good news is with this piece that we put at the end there is it's logical to say, okay, the next part is let's put together some paperwork. Let's get an application. Let's go through underwriting to see what we can get from an approval perspective with the carrier. Yeah, we're excited. We've got a lot of positive reviews with respect to this, and this is just the first of many. We're the next one we're coming out with, which will be probably before the end of the year. I didn't even mention this to you, is our qualified funding story, the IRA funding story. That will be a sister to this, and then we're going to jump over to annuity products as well. So,
well, that's exciting. It's like, hey, look, you heard it here first. That's awesome. I mean,
so we have more coming down the road. So that's exciting because I think that the more we teach the story, the more people get comfortable with the story. And the story is not going to change the first 4 or 5 pages. Never going to change. It's just kind of the narrative of how does a qualified fund, how do I use IRA dollars to buy it? And we've got some really nice, once again, pictures, graphics. Now we're just waiting for compliance to sign off on it, but hopefully we'll have that done here shortly, and then it will be ready to go. But yeah, it's all good stuff. I mean, that's the good news. And working with your team there at Producers and yourself, those are key parts. Great back office support for your advisors.
Absolutely. And, you know, Tim, why I thought this was so relevant because a lot of the agents and the advisors that I work with, right, long-term care is not it's just not their go-to. They're not really specialists in that field. So every time someone asks for a conversation or an illustration, it's not uncommon for me to be on a Zoom with an agent and a client to kind of go through basically this story. And it's not that I don't want people to still feel that that's the value that I'm bringing. I'm not looking for this to replace myself, but I think this will do a wonderful job allowing them to start that conversation so that they don't have to end the conversation with their client. Meaning, if you start the conversation, you don't have to end it when the consumer or your client comes in and says, hey, I need to talk about this because I now have this, or I just went to the doctor and this, or I think there might be an early onset of this, right? And you have to end the conversation right there because you don't have anything that's going to provide a solution because the house is already on fire. So if we can start the conversation before we have to end it, I think that does very, very well. And, you know, and let's not miss the idea that, right, the entire nation, everybody's kind of watching all of these different states that are trying to implement long-term care programs at some level. And even though you've only heard a lot about Washington, and then you've heard that, you know, California is doing some stuff, don't think that there are not other states out there looking at this, because this is a very big concern, an issue in the United States with our aging population. And how do we provide that care? And so don't ever be afraid to bring this conversation and plant that seed for your younger clients, because I promise you, they're seeing this happen in their families, whether they're intimately involved in helping provide care or coordinate care. They're watching their parents do it for their grandparents, whatever the case is. This just gives us a sales track to run on. And I think it's absolutely fantastic that you can have something that brings that conversation forward and allows you to at least plant that seed so that we can start helping our consumers and our clients and the people around this country to put a plan in place, as opposed to the crisis and the tragedy that these families experience when, oh my goodness, now what do I do with mom? How do we take care of mom? Tim, I want to thank you very much. Who knows, you know what, between you and I, we could probably do an entire part 2 on this. Never know, it might be you and I back in November to add a little bit more. Who knows what you're going to launch next? So that might be worthy of another conversation. So my next podcast is November 28th. Watch for that. Obviously, if you want to kind of tune in or listen on demand, I always put it back up on our website. But again, if you've not looked at this sales process and you want to have more about it, email me, Angie@producersxl.com. Call me, 800-541-6705. I'll send you a sample of this.
Hey,
Tim?
Angie, I want to just say thanks. And you got me thinking, because we always think about, you mentioned November 28th is your next podcast, and what's going to happen between now and then, not only Halloween, which but the bigger thing is Thanksgiving.
Absolutely.
And I will tell you, and I know you've mentioned this before, which got me thinking about, that's when the family all gets together, and that's maybe the first time maybe the kids are seeing kind of the I won't say the train wreck, but kind of the chaos that's going on at home with mom and dad. And we normally find that the day or two after a holiday like Thanksgiving, our claims intake, our claims phone calls, right? And I think that's probably true with all carriers, right? We need to get help from mom and dad. And so this is a great time to be having these conversations with the customers. Go back to your book of business, think of those people that are 50 to 55 to 60, and start thinking of the extended care planning. I mean, I'm going to end where we started with the plan.
Yep.
Getting them to engage with, invite them in, and start thinking about putting together, and we're going to give you the script to walk through. And you got a great team there. So once again, thanks, and love to come back and join you in November. But so I'll wait to see if that works. But appreciate the time today to spend with your group.
Awesome. It's always good having you, Tim. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. If you want to catch the podcast or re-listen to it because you want to get the sales presentation and then come back and listen to the podcast and kind of hear or write some notes of what we said throughout that process, it'll be up on our website, producersxl.com. You can certainly get it there on demand anytime as well. So thank you, everybody. I will be talking to you after Thanksgiving. So everyone have a wonderful time. Thank you. Bye.